We're going.
All right. We will give it a few seconds to let everyone join. Awesome. Well, thanks everyone. Welcome and thank you for joining us today. We're really excited to kind of share the story behind what we called our Mission Possible, which is completing a Site 1 WMS implementation in partnership with Source Logistics and Softian in just under 5 months. So today we'll be talking not only about how we accomplished that, but really the approach that we took to make sure that under such a timeline, we still had a very successful go live. Before we jump in, though, a couple of housekeeping items. Quick disclosure there. We do want to share that although we believe a lot of the tips and tricks that we'll be sharing with you today can be very beneficial, the information discussed in this section really represents the views of individuals and does not constitute any legal advice or views of Alpine and only views of Alpine supply chains and source logistics. You should consult with your organizational leadership and legal counsel as needed for your specific situations. Also for this webinar, we'd love to make this more of a discussion. So we do have the chat and the QA options open. All participants are muted, but if you would like to comment or ask questions, please use the QA or the chat options. We do have someone that's going to be monitoring that and letting us know. Awesome. Let's talk through introduce your panelist here. So I myself will be leading this webinar. I'm Brenda Stoltz, one of the senior managing directors with Alpine Supply Chain Solutions, where we really focus on operational transformation, supply chain strategy, and technology enablement. And I was the project director on this project with Source Logistics. So joining me today is Bart Bullard, VP of Information Technology, but actually exciting announcement. So you have a new title, Bart, right? I will turn it over to you and let you introduce yourself and share the exciting new update.
Yeah, I'm Bart Bullard. I've been at Source for 2 years, and the CEO and the board just graciously promoted me to Chief Technology Officer. So, uh, breaking news, I
Very well
guess.
deserved.
Yeah,
Yeah, very well deserved.
thank you.
And now, Bart, you were the one that was really responsible for leading this technology transformation for Source, correct?
Yes, the company brought me in to help transform and get us on a modern platform that is scalable and aligns with our vision of being the provider of choice for cultural food and beverage business and suppliers that are working to get into the U.S. market. We believe it's very important for everybody to be able to have a piece of their cultural from a food and beverage perspective, having that availability, and that's what we're here to do for the U.S. We want to reach 95% of the U.S. population within a one-day delivery window from our facilities, and we're well on our way. So
Awesome.
we
And
need a
Bart, I
WMS
realize
that
now,
supports
but
it.
yeah, we should have probably put a quick slide here or snippet to just share a little bit about Source Logistics. But do you want to just give us a high level of how many distribution centers you have and what your operation looks like?
Yeah, we've got 21 sites currently. We have cold, frozen temperature control, and then ambient. We are on the East Coast. We're in Portland. We're in LA. We're in Houston. We're in Dallas and Laredo, Chicago, and New Jersey. And there will and looking to expand in the southeast to come. So if we have any customers that are interested in that, we're exploring those opportunities now. I'd love to have a discussion.
Awesome. Great. So let's talk about what we're here to talk about today, right? So I think, let's start with the why. I think every successful transformation really starts with understanding why it's very clear that change can no longer wait. So, Bart, can you walk us through what drove the urgency behind this project?
Yeah, the great thing that as we've expanded quickly, we've done through acquisition and through organic growth. But that left us with a system that was, especially our M&A system, that was a little bit on the old side, I would say. When we were purchasing the company, I thought it was funny. I was when you get on a phone call with a bunch of bankers and people from the other company, I thought I'd try to make them laugh. And I said, hey, show me your code, your Y2K code on the WMS. And I thought they would all chuckle, but instead the person that programmed it pulled it up and showed me live some of the Y2K coding. So that just gives you an idea on the age of the system we inherited. And then our existing legacy system on the source side, it wasn't functioning as well as we'd like. We were having some interesting support problems. Both of them weren't candidates to scale the way source needed to scale. So we knew we had to adopt a new platform, and that's where we, after 6-month requirement process, came up with Softion as the winner. And then we knew we needed an implementation partner, and that's where we ended up with Alpine. And the mission was to really do we have 25 site on this slide. We've consolidated a couple that will go back up in the next few months, but we knew we needed to do that as quickly as possible to gain the benefit, right? The benefit for our customers, the benefit for our operations. So that was the goal. How fast could we get our first one live? And the goal was within 5 to 6 months.
Yeah, no, thanks, Bart. I do remember the first time we met. So you guys did the selection on your own. When we started discussions, you had already selected Softion and you were ready to go. And I remember us talking and you saying, well, we really want to get this implemented in 5 months. And it was something that now I'm excited to share the story, but definitely something that was a bit anxiety causing when I started hearing about it. But with that, talk us a little bit about, from the very beginning, you knew that you had 20 fights to roll out, but there was really a strategy and you had this 80/20 blueprint strategy principle to kind of help guide us through this.
Yeah, we knew that what we do for a living across all of our sites is similar, but not exactly the same, right? Source plays in the space of repetition is good, but our customers demand specialized services occasionally. So that's where the 80/20 rule came in. So we knew if we built our first site and we standardized 80% of our functionality and our configuration, that future sites would then only need a 20% change. And so that we could drive quicker implementations, knowing we called it our gold template. I've heard that used a lot, but our standard source site, that's 80% ready to go. And then we just take the customer needs and adjust it 20%. So it could be things like we have it here, CPG, consumer fulfillment. Sources primarily B2B is what we do, but we do some fringe things for our customers as they need. Transportation, logistic, transportation side of things. Even our portal is some customer specific work.
Yeah, I
And
think it's interesting when you talk about the golden template because to your point, I would say we try to get to about 80% of those processes are standard. I think there are times when you go into these implementations when clients like to see that percentage be even higher, right? But I think the unique challenge here is you as a 3PL, you don't have 100% ownership over what some of those requirements are, right? Obviously, like you have clients that have their own requirements. And so that had to be taken into consideration as we thought about how standard can you really get across all these sites.
exactly right. It was very important to know where that line is and not forget who we're serving. In fact, in our lessons learned, I'll say that our first site really taught us that governance. It was that Alpine came in and helped us really set up. Let me just set that up a little bit better. The worst thing you can do on an implementation like this is to assume everyone can continue to do their day jobs and do a big project like this. And so that's really what Alpine came in to help us do. It give us dedicated support on governance, on change management, and documenting all of our SOPs and changes, and really being a third set of eyes with Softion as our partner, Source Logistics, and then Alpine as an operational set of eyes, and running those project pieces that really created the complete team that we did our project with. And that was an important piece of what we did, or we would not have been as successful. And so those learnings that we came across as we adjusted, I think the 80/20 became 70/30. really
Yep.
by the time we were done. But we wouldn't have been able to identify that and make those adjustments through the implementation without the extra eyes and that vision as we went through.
Nope. Agree. And thank you for that, or appreciate it. I mean, I think this is kind of a great transition into the next slide, right? How do we accelerate the timeline? As I talked about, typically when we're talking about these WMS implementation projects, we like to say, hey, you should probably, depending on the complexity of the business, 8 to 10 months. Some can maybe even be a little bit longer than 12 months, right? When you're looking at operational downtime, peak periods, et cetera, right? So to say, hey, we're going to do this in 5 months was something that was really pretty aggressive, right? It didn't mean that we couldn't get it done, but I think we all knew, and by we, I mean Source Logistics was aware, Softian was aware, and Alpine was definitely very aware that this is an aggressive timeline and that there was going to be trade-offs, and we really need to stay very closely aligned to make decisions quickly if we were going to be successful at this, right? So some of the key strategies that we kind of leveraged to do this was, and you talked about it already, was first most governance model, right? So we had a very disciplined governance structure. We had recurring meetings. So we had a weekly PM meeting. We had a weekly project status meeting. We had monthly steer codes. We had biweekly executive meetings, right? And we were meeting very often. Yes, that can be a lot of meetings, and would love to hear your thoughts, Bart, on that. But ultimately, this ensured that we were all very aligned. If a challenge came up, if there was a question, if there was this confusion, we would get through that much quicker, right? And I think in today's world, some of the pros is that a lot of the team was remote, right? So you weren't sitting, we actually should have talked about this, right? You weren't sitting where we were going live, which was in California, right? I'm in Indiana. We have the Alpine team that's across the United States. We have Softian that also was not in California or Texas or Indiana. And so, as you have a remote team, it's very important to make sure that you have these different touch points throughout the day and throughout the week so that when things come up, you can get the answers and the support that you need very quickly, right? So from the very beginning, we got very aligned on like, these are the standard meetings that we're going to have, and we'll add more if we need to. And then we were also very clear about, from a governance model perspective, what's the escalation path? If we have a problem, if someone needs to make a decision across all the parties, Source, Softian, and Alpine, what's the escalation path so that we don't wait 24, 36, 48 hours to get an answer? Because when you have 5 months, you really just can't afford to wait, right?
That's right. And what you said to a lot of people would sound like overmeet, right? The number of meetings we had and you have, it's a pendulum is how I always explain it to my team. You're going to have to make adjustments depending upon where you are in the project, but it's about prep ahead of time. It's about knowing the decisions that need to be made, or what is the purpose of each meeting, and getting out of that as quickly as possible, right? And not spending too much time. But overmeet or meeting fatigue, whatever you want to call it, is something that the leaders should be paying attention to as a key piece of the governance. And the other, I'll tell you, the most important thing we did is we didn't let our decision log pile up. We were reviewing it with the executive team bi-weekly, sometimes every day, to ensure that the team had the decisions made they needed to go execute on. And I would say anybody looking to doing a project like that, that's a key piece of governance. You don't need to let those decisions languish.
No, but I think that's a great call out, Bart. And I think it's definitely that, as I worked with your team and noticed as a strength right away. Not only did you not let them sit, but quite honestly, like, you had visibility to them and you created a list, right? And, Alpine and Softian, we were all kind of adding to that list, but you really owned the fact that, like, hey, even if it seems small, this decision has impact or ripple effects across the whole entire project. So how do we make that decision? And how do we make sure that we have the right people providing
Yeah.
input before we make that decision, right?
Yeah, and it allowed us to watch for decision paralysis. There were a few times we saw a decision that was difficult to make,
Yes.
and it really helped us, like you said, the escalation path. It wasn't that someone wasn't doing their job well. It's that we need more, or expand the audience, or more people involved to make a decision. And if it was sitting too long, it became obvious something needed to be added, right? And it wasn't.
Yep.
A lot of people think of escalations as negative, or it's a negative thing. But the reality is, it's conflicting priorities, or we need to expand the audience usually is what's causing those delays.
Nope,
That's what we
completely
found
agree
on
with
this
you.
project.
Yeah, and I think sometimes it's just a team that needs support as well too, right? To your
Yeah,
point, they're trying to do their day-to-day job. There's decisions that they need to make. They understand there's high stakes, right? Because any decision that team was making, they knew is it going to impact them, and it had the potential to impact 21 other sites, right? So that can be overwhelming for someone. So I think that escalation also helped to ensure that the team felt supported and it didn't feel like everything really fell on them.
yep,
I think that also ties, with our phase gate methodology. So as we talk about escalation, as we talk about governance, we knew we had 5 months. It wasn't about skipping steps, right? So we have a very, I would say, formal phase gate methodology where we walk through at the end of, design. The key stakeholders have to review it and have to sign off on it before we go move on to development, before we move off to validation. And having that formal sign off through all of those phases, one, ensures that everyone's aligned. Two, to your point, it ensures that any decision that needs to be made is made, as opposed to continuing to kind of like kick the can down the road until it kind of creates a problem, right? So we were made sure that we still kept that very disciplined phase gate methodology, even though we only had 5 months, right? It just meant that we
yep.
were going through those phases much quicker than we typically would.
That's right. It's not about skipping steps. It's about being accountable for every hour and what you're doing. And every meeting, again, every meeting's important. And then every action you take is important. So,
Nope, completely agree. I think another thing is that, OCM. So OCM shift, we did pull OCM a little forward into the design phase to ensure that we were ready for this quick timeline, right? Traditionally, OCM can be seen as pretty heavily focused on training as well as go live, right? I think for us, like we really start with OCM from the very beginning, identifying the right stakeholders, right? So in this case, we knew that not only did we need to have the representation from Site 1 leadership, but we also needed to have representatives from potentially other sites. We needed to have, obviously, corporate representation. We needed to have the billing department. So ensuring that we had everyone at the table from the very beginning tried to minimize the risk of things, issues, questions coming up later in the project that were going to have the potential to impact either our timeline, right, our budget, or what we were trying to accomplish. Not to say those things didn't show up, right? And we'll get to lessons learned, but I think pulling OCM up and going through that stakeholder assessment pretty early on allowed us for us to really understand who is the team and who did we need to go to depending on what problem arose, right?
yeah. And I think so many times I've heard when we talk about change management, it is a very nice buzzword. And everyone talks about how important it is. But when it comes time and you're in the middle of the heat of a project, it's often the thing that it gets put aside first in order to ensure you keep your delivery schedule, or if there are fires. And the reality is, by putting it aside, you create more of those situations, especially as you get towards the end. And I think having a partner like Alpine that was owning OCM for us, where my team could focus on learning the software, the configuration, delivering for our customer, delivering for our operation, because that's again for an implementation team, our customer is also our operation, right? That team. So that was such an important piece to have an OCM manager that helped line it up. And again, we did it in a way where it was repeatable down in the future. The Alpine team really helped us. Not only it gives you that first set of training documents, that first set of SOPs, but it gave us the templates. We didn't have to go do that work. We spent the time on the things that mattered to source from an operational customer perspective.
No, but I agree, and I will say you're right. I've never met a client that tells me OCM is that important, right? I think everybody acknowledges it, and to your point, maybe it's a little bit of a buzzword at times, and so they all acknowledge it. But I can also say that unfortunately, more often than not, when budget is a concern, it's one of the first line items that get cut, right? And not because the client doesn't think it's important, but because the client thinks that this is something, to your point, that they can just do on their own, and not realizing that having an experienced partner, and we, have actually proxy certified OCM consultants that can follow the ADCAR model and make it, to your point, very easy for your team to execute, actually takes work off of your plate, right? right? And so you're still paying for it one way or another, but ensuring that you have someone that's been there, that's done it, and that's just making it easy for your team to execute makes a really big difference.
And I think that's more important for your, if it's a multi-site, it's more important for the second, third, fourth, fifth site than it almost is the first site. I don't know if that's a completely true statement, but we'll start there.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And, the last key strategy that we released here was centralized tracking. And I will say
Yep.
credit to source. So we had used Monday.com in the past, but not to the extent that we used it on this project. And so Monday.com was a tool that Source was already using. So it was very easy for us to get on board and say if the organization is already used to it, they already know how to leverage it. It's the best, it's one less change for them, right? So it's the best tool for us to use. And so we used Monday.com really across the project, across all work streams. So we used it we had our overall project plan there. To your point, we had the decision log there. When we started testing, we had our issue tracking and resolution there. Really, this was kind of a one-stop shop where we went and Softion used it, Source employees used it, Alpine used it. It was very easy to work together and understand exactly where we were across the multiple work streams in the project.
Yeah, and to be fair, Monday.com is not sponsoring Brenda or I or Alpine or Source, but it became a very powerful tool for us. And having that tool in place, so Source works to build a culture of continual improvement, and that tool was in use by not just IT, but operations was using it. The rest of the company was using it for other projects. All the executives were familiar with it. And so what that did is it, instead of having to introduce a new platform that everyone would have to learn, which often leads to a slow adoption or not adopting it,
Mhm.
it really helped that we had that in place and working. And that was a really good piece of pre-work that was in place for Source, in my opinion. And it was a powerful tool. And some of their AI and the dashboarding available was a valuable piece to what we did, Brenda.
Nope, absolutely agree. And actually, yeah, Bart, I mean, I think, for anyone that is exploring doing a WMS implementation in the future, right, I would say don't wait to introduce a Monday.com or a similar tool to get your IT or your operations team used to that tool until you start the project, right? I think you guys were already using Monday.com before this implementation. I imagine you'll continue to use it after the implementation. So there's definitely a use here and a use case here outside of a implementation project.
That's right.
Awesome. All right. So we've talked and we've kind of hinted already a couple of times at lessons learned, right? But like we talked about it from day one, we knew that the goal here was not only to have a successful go live for one site, but instead it was to have a successful go live for one, but also set the roadmap to be successful time and time again, right? So from an Alpine perspective, our goal was really to ensure that we were going to set up Source for success because we knew that we needed something that was going to be repeatable, that they were going to be able to scale even when Alpine was already gone. And with that, we were very intentional about understanding lessons learned from the very beginning to make sure that we continue to improve the process. But Bart, if you could just share, from your perspective, some of the key takeaways from site one. And as you're actually continuing to future sites today, that would be really beneficial.
Yeah, I think that moving our problem statement of having the older WMSs, having the data architecture that's not as modern as we would prefer, it when we went live, master data and the data prep that we did, we thought we did a good job of it, but we realized how important it is to a modern WMS that you are really inventory all of those pieces of WMS data, and this really goes for any implementation, but for us, it was we should have spent more time on it, and we will in our next sites. And it really pays to front load that pre-work, right? Get it in the condition you need it in the current WMS, and then move the data instead of trying to move the data and not as clean and then cleanse it. That just creates more problems than it solves. And that seems like an obvious statement. But when you have a moving warehouse with inventories occurring and you're trying to get product out the door, that's a difficult task to work ahead of time. And you don't have the luxury of shutting down a facility in a conversion for an entire week and doing a full facility inventory. If you do, I'm envious of you because it's very difficult to do that and not impact your customers. So that was hugely important. The other thing is testing discipline. Whenever you have to do, if we're looking at the 20% of customer needed, we avoided customization with Softeon as much as possible, right? Customization is not scalable. But there is configuration specific work. And there are some pieces that we had to do outside of Softeon, which, by the way, is with their API structure. I'll give them a plug. It's great for the ability to build ancillary systems on top of it, or software on top of it, that really gives you that edge with your customers and in your market. You need to ensure that the build timelines are aligned so that you freeze when you do your UAT and your testing and your training. If you're touching too many things as you continue, obviously that's a bad thing. And when you try to keep a timeline, you make some tough decisions occasionally. But code freezes and regression testing are an important piece of that don't underestimate it. And then again, role clarity. Role clarity and training is an important piece of that OCM part that we were talking about earlier. That having classroom training for people that work in a warehouse with their hands and on different equipment all day long is only partially effective and can never be fully effective. If you can, I would suggest carving out a small portion of the warehouse, build a test warehouse, even if it's a quarter of an aisle, where they can go do their job function on product they know in a space they know and not in a classroom with labels. Hey, this label's a pallet, right? Just pretend like it's a pallet. No, actually have a pallet of boxes, right? And let them move that pallet and see what happens when they try to put it in the wrong place and how the physical and the system work together. That was an important piece on training and letting each role function in the day in the life of type scenario. I think
Nope,
those are the
absolutely
best
great.
things.
Yeah, and I would say, specifically on that last one, role clarity, I think at times clients think if it's a very large facility, then like they're concerned that, hey, I have a lot of employees that I have to train. Well, that's where role clarity becomes even more important, right? Because you want to make sure that you have a very good understanding of who's being trained on what. But it's also important if you have a small team, because what happens is when you have a smaller team, the challenge is we typically say, well, there isn't really defined roles, right? Like, Brenda does really everything. She can do inbound, she can do outbound, she can do, QA. And it's helping them understand that even though they got there, they probably got there through being there 3, 5, 10 years. And so you can't now expect them to learn all of that on day one or on 2 weeks worth of training, right? So role clarity becomes really important, really, when you have a big team, when you have a small team. But more than anything, it's to really set up that person for success, right? So to give them the opportunity to adapt the new system and to do it at a pace that is going to be sustainable, right? Because if you try to train them on everything from day one, likelihood is they're going to forget a lot more than if you slowly build, right? Slowly build from one task to the next. Overall, you're going to have a better rate of success and retention from that employee for sure. Great.
I think that's absolutely right.
All right. Let's talk a little bit about results, right? So at the end of the day, we did this not because I doubt, Bart, you were bored or I wanted to sign up for a quick 5-month implementation, but obviously there were some goals and measurable business outcomes that we were expecting. From the very beginning, we said, hey, Bart, at the end of the day, when we're done with this, how would you rate if we were successful or not? And we came up with some actual KPIs that we then tracked after go live. So would love to hear from you if we feel like we met those business outcomes that you signed up for, or we all signed up for, I should say.
Yeah, and we did. I think it took a little longer than we initially thought because of it's the first site, right? But the goals we set, we've seen the deliverables, we saw them quickly, but with any implementation, the first one just has a little bit more of an adoption time frame, right? You should account for. But we're seeing improved billing accuracy. Absolutely, that's been a huge piece for me. And that benefit is not just sources for our customers as well, right? It's accuracy goes both ways when it comes to billing. You don't act, there's no accidental double billing, right? If it's on a piece of paper, if you go from big chief tablet billing to automated system building, that's a huge improvement for everybody. Integration messaging, right? That's always a scary move when you move the integrations between systems. We have that integration success. I think it was 8 weeks that instead of 6, but I believe that it'll be even less than 6 weeks on following systems, right? I will say another lesson learned here is ensure you have very good validation in place so that you can see those messages you need to go track down. Because there are going to be one or two exceptions that were built a long time, especially in older systems that were built and it was hard to identify, right? So that's a huge piece there. And then I think that operational stability having that down to the functional and the manpower within 2 weeks is a pretty good time frame. And we discovered that we started seeing benefits after 2 weeks after we felt like we were completely stable. They started being able to drive continual improvement on labor. And we have seen some labor improvements and we've seen billing improvements through both of those things over the first few months we've been live.
Awesome. Well, and I think, secondly, obviously operational metrics were one key to success. I think the other key that we were really tracking is setting your team up to be able to do this again. So where are you guys as it relates to, doing this on your own and the next go live for your future sites?
So we went live January, was it the 16th, Brenda? All of a sudden, I just went blank on the date, January 16th. And we are taking our second site live June 1st. But our third site and our fourth site will be July 1st and then July 15th. And then the next very complex big site goes live at the beginning of August. August 1st is what it's on path to be. So you can see the pace of implementation is starting to increase. And those times have actually come down from what we originally forecasted now a little bit. So it has the experience gained and the time spent up front to really put these standards in place seem to be paying off already.
Awesome. Well, we're excited to hear about it and look forward to hearing about how they go. Awesome.
Are
Well,
you
Dave, I think,
seeing any pushback
oh, great.
from your sites as to, hey, we're not prepared, or hey, um we're not ready for this. We're getting bogged down in some of the process. Are you getting some of that, or are things pretty straightforward? Your sites are excited about it and moving forward.
No, in fact, I just got off a call right before this with the regional director of California. So we went live in Montebello, California, as our first site, and we have two other sites, City of Industry and one we call Yates because it's the street, but it's right by. It's in Montebello as well. We're bringing Yates live January 1st, but City of Industry we were going to wait to bring live until later in the year or early next year, just simply because we were going to go work in some of the other regions. But the Marco Martinez, who's our regional leader in the LA region, really pushed me just now to let him get it in COI because he's seeing such a benefit from an inventory perspective, from a billing perspective. He really wants us to finish out his region. And in fact, he's in New Jersey this week, and he's become our marketing department for Softeon within the company. And so, considering he was the regional director of the first site, which is always going to be the most difficult site and have the most problems, he's out in our organization being our mouthpiece now, tells you, David, they're wanting it across the board.
That's awesome. When
we
yeah, I
know
was
the
going to say,
third
Bart,
rule, right? When change happens, a third of the people can't wait, a third are kind of in between and a third are not going to like change. Well, we've seen that be true, but the reality is the people that are leading, the people that have responsibility are loving the visibility, loving the new data that they're getting and how fast the data they get comes. So what were you saying, Brenda? I'm sorry.
Yeah, no, Bart, I was gonna say, I think you touched on a good point there about the first site. I didn't ask you earlier, right? But I think even when we started this discussion, you as an organization were still trying to figure out which should go first. And I thought you guys took a very thoughtful and strategic approach on how you landed on Montebello, as well as your second, third site. And I know that plan has changed a little bit because you guys continue to get better and learn more about what's going to work for your organization. But
Yeah.
if you could talk us through like how you landed on that first site for anyone else that's looking at doing a multi-site rollout, right? What should they consider in selecting that very first site? Because to your point, it's going to become very impactful for the rest of the sites, right? And who you choose to be that example definitely has a huge impact.
And listen, we have some really good leaders, and so that we kind of had ties across the board on which regional leader, but that was important, right? Having strong leaders in not just the region, but the leader of the facility, the supervisors. Those are all things that you weigh and measure. And I'm going to tell you a little secret, Brenda. I think anybody that does implementations for a living, or those of us who work in IT on the systems, there's something a little bit wrong with this because it is a difficult, hard thing to do, and yet we love doing it. So so um, we really looked at it from the perspective of, instead of going real soft and easy with a one customer facility, we landed on the idea that we wanted to do a very complex, customer rich system the first time, because that's when you have the most support. We had Alpine, the most Alpine support and the most Softeon support on the first facility. We also knew that our team knew the least then, and so it gave us an opportunity to see multiple types of warehouse work: B2C, B2B, VAS, right? Fulfillment, dynamic replenishments, large container imports, all of those types of things that gives us exposure while we have the extra support to build that foundation for the rest of our sites. So that's the approach we took, and I admit it made our life a little more difficult with Montebello. Instead of a one customer or the most simple site, we did opposite, and I think it paid off. Do you agree with that, Brenda?
No, I do. And I think this is why, we often get asked to like, well, what should the strategy be, right? Should it be the most simple site so that we kind of get our feet wet and really understand it? Should it be the big bad bear, right? Like the biggest, most complex because you've solved most of your issues up front. And the reality is that there's trade-offs and there are pros and cons to both. But ultimately, and you talked about this, that culture and that leadership is so important. And you are the only ones that truly know that, right? Because it's not about how big or how small the challenges is, but it's about how are those leaders going to react? Are they gonna like put their head down and try to help you solve it, or are they gonna be the first ones to point out and say, "Hey, this is a problem. What are we gonna do?" And sure, we'd all like to think that nobody's gonna undermine the project, but the reality is there are leaders that are gonna become your change champions, and that's really where you want to start, right? Because if
Yeah,
they have the right mentality, they are going to make sure that this is successful no matter what. It's really going to set the tone for the entire project, right? And for the rest of the journey, no matter how many more sites you're going to do after that. But I
agreed.
agree. I think you guys took the right approach. And I think you've pivoted a couple of times even after on like, well, what site should do second and third. And I think you continue to look at it from the right perspective. Absolutely.
Yeah. And,
Awesome.
and and with Marco being that change champion, it's influenced that, right? We
Mhm.
His sites are getting pulled up because he sees the value, and now so do other people. So
Absolutely. But Dave, we've got a few minutes for questions. Do you see any in the chat or in the Q&A that we want to pull up?
The the one that we have is that you talked about early on, you talked about temperature controlled environments. Does that have an effect on you? Did that have an effect on the project? And how you had to handle things with equipment or uh, just general processing?
No, it did not. So Softeon has that capability, and we've been selecting equipment, and we set our source standard beforehand, and then we took that temperature control piece, all of the equipment that we know works in our facility, and when we were doing our selection, we knew that was the equipment we had, and we ensured that it would work. It was compatible with Softeon. So we kind of built it. We made it part of our selection to ensure it could. Now, all of the big companies, all of the tier ones out there can do that, right? So it wasn't that big. Temperature control from a WMS perspective is just data, right? Is what it is. It's about controlling your requirements and config on your individual SKUs. It's about the temperature readings and then combining that data and getting it to the customer. So it didn't play, it didn't add excessive complexity to the project.
Good deal. Good deal. And then also to the same light, you kind of talked about uh, your multiple sites and the age of the software that you had and all that type of thing.
Mhm.
Um, were are do you perceive integration as being um, a a difficult thing across the board, or are you looking at it more as a uniformed flow, uniformed rollout?
And you may not know this. I'm going to ask a clarifying question. Is this talking about integration of other of
To
message
your,
integration?
yeah, to your ERPs, your integration to
Oh,
your ERPs and that type of thing.
no, no. So Softeon is an API first provider, and so that being the case, it makes those integrations pretty easy to handle and move, right? So it is not. It is something I don't want to discount it. It's something you absolutely pay attention to, but the platform that we selected it made it um, a very capable and cautious yet successful move. And I think every move, every new site will be that much more simple as well.
Perfect. And the last question we had was, we've talked through a lot of different things here, but what are like the one or two key takeaways that you want to tell people, um, on carrying forward to your future sites to say, hey, these are the things that I would say to ensure that you're going to have smoother rollouts, smoother um, processing through that. What is the key? What are the key things that you would point out?
I think building those templates, building the 80/20 rule, really defining that and being fluid in your adjustments as you go through the first site on what needs to be a standard and what needs to be config that needs to be determined at each site is an important piece, right? If you become too rigid too fast, it drives difficulty in adjusting on future sites. I think I think the people, right, understand that you're building on an implementation team. You're building a group of people that have a good set of knowledge. You make sure you get them the extra training they need, right? Ensure you equip them with the tools they need to do the job well, and then get out of their way for the most part. So those are the two things that popped in my head. What about you, Brenda? Anything?
Yeah, no, I agree. And I think when you said templates, it's one of the key things that kind of reminded me of like how intentional we were through the whole entire 5 months to say, hey, we're creating this test scenario, created in a way that can be used over and over again, right? Hey, we're creating this SOP. Hey, we're creating these training agendas. Even the project plan, right? We created in a way that your team could just take it and 60-70% of the work was already done, and now it was just adding the different details for the specific sites, right?
Mhm.
So I think, if you have 2 to 3 sites, maybe it isn't quite as important, but when you're looking at 21 sites, how quickly you can get through them, and I'm sure you're having these discussions, Bart, impacts your ROI, right? And so obviously making sure that from day one you're setting yourself up for success, I think becomes really important. And I think we through this project did a nice job of that. And so I'm excited to see that it's paying off with your next go live happening here soon, and then the other ones quickly following, right? I think, as we close out, there is one question that we get a lot when we talk about this project, right? And it's because when we're talking to clients and they're still assessing whether or not they're going to buy a WMS, there's a lot of thought that goes into it. But once someone has made the decision, so yes, this is our software vendor, and yes, we're going to go ahead and go with it, they want to get it live as soon as possible, right? And I'm sure that's just human nature. Like, I may think about buying something, and when I make the decision to buy it, like, I want it tomorrow, right? And so the 5 months is very aggressive. I think it's what probably excites a lot of clients when they hear that. But the question that we get often asked is, well, how much did you have to give up to make this timeline, right? And I think I've asked you that before, Bart, like your perspective on it, but would love for you to share with the group, yes, we had a very tight timeline. Do you feel like you gave things up? And if so, what were those things, and was it worth it?
I think if you want to condense the timeline, you can't go after every gain. You're obviously choosing a new system because there you have the ROI and those gains for your company. And if you try to get every gain, make every change, our COO at the time, he called it, if you open up the buffet for everyone to get everything they want out of a system, you're not going to have a fast timeline. Think of it as building a new house, right? For if you're building a new house from the ground up, for those of you who have done it, you don't always get the luxury of choosing 100% new furniture and decorations and taking that in. You build the house, you get in the house with what you have, so that you begin living in it, and you make those adjustments as you go, right? So doing a 5 month implementation means you need to get in the house and ensure you're living in it and everything is safe. And then you start the continual improvement process to get more gains. We have seen some initial gains that are good. We know that there are more on the table to go get, but it's important to get the platform moved and stable and then go after them than trying to do it all at once. I think that's the biggest thing.
Nope, absolutely. And I love when you share your perspective there, because ultimately, you don't see it as a giving up, right? And I agree. I think you're just, if I was going to sum it up, I say you're realistic about the expectation, right? So you kind
Mhm.
of understand the trade-off. And I think you and, the team at Source were very clear about, hey, everyone, this is our priority. And so that
Yep.
means that our timeline is a priority, and that we will make decisions that at the time may not make sense, and we will come back and revisit later, but we are all understanding that the priority is, let's accomplish it within 5 months, and then we'll build and we'll continue to improve on top of it, right? So I think
Yep.
in that sense, it's kind of a great example of why we were successful. And again, I'll say it myself, I was going into it being pretty nervous about the timeline, but definitely very excited about how it all turned out. And I think a lot of the credit goes to your leadership and what you've been able to do and will continue to do across these implementations. And so with that, we'll
Well,
have to update your title. I think it's very well deserved a promotion. So congratulations again. We are doing this again. So Bart and I actually going to work. So if anyone is going to work here in May, I believe we're doing a presentation or a talk there on May 19th. So we would love to have you stop by and visit. And if you have any follow-up questions, we can have a one-on-one discussion with you. But Bart, really just want to thank you again, not only for doing this webinar with me, but being a great partner as we went through this implementation. Definitely really appreciate it.
yeah, well, thank you, Brenda. Alpine was a great partner. You were as well. I think we did the project well together. I will say that Alpine, Softion, and Source made a great team together. All
Great.
three worked well together, and that's such an important thing. Consider culture in your partners, and if you don't, you're making a mistake. How they can come together and match and work is an important thing. And speaking of coming to work, we'll see you there. Come visit
Yeah,
us. Thanks for
sounds great.
attending.
Thanks,
Okay.
everyone. Have a great rest of your day.